Okay, so we've got a pretty intense stack of sources to dive into today surrounding this situation unfolding in Turkey.
Yeah, definitely looks like a lot going on.
Um, and a really big development we need to unpack is this arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu.
Right. That's front and center in a lot of these reports.
Yeah, and I think, for our listeners, it's important to frame this right off the bat.
Absolutely.
This isn't just like, another news blip. This feels different.
Yeah, it has a different weight to it.
This feels like a real turning point, potentially with some, major consequences down the line.
When you have someone who so clearly seemed to be, a viable alternative to the current leadership,
Exactly.
and they're suddenly taken into custody, it really forces you to kind of, examine what's going on beneath the surface.
Right. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page here, Ekrem İmamoğlu, he's not just some random politician.
Right. He's a significant figure.
He's become like a symbol,
A beacon of hope for a lot of people.
Yeah, a beacon of hope for a big chunk of the Turkish opposition.
And that Istanbul mayoral victory back in 2019,
Yeah.
that was huge.
Yeah, that was a statement win.
You have to think about the context there. Istanbul is Erdoğan's political birthplace.
Right, it's where he built his base.
That's where he rose to prominence. And for Imamoğlu to come in and break the AKP's hold on that city.
It was a major upset.
It was a major statement, and it wasn't even close.
It was decisive.
And he managed to bring together such a broad coalition of voters. You had conservatives, secularists, nationalists, even parts of the Kurdish community.
That's the thing that really made people take notice, right?
That ability to unify across those traditional divides.
It really suggested a different kind of political future.
It really did.
So that's exactly what we're going to try to do today in this deep dive for you.
Yeah, we're going to unpack this whole situation.
We're going to look at this, arrest the immediate context,
The bigger picture.
the reasons being given, and then the potential consequences, What could this all mean?
We've got a whole range of sources here offering different perspectives.
And our goal is to try to help you understand why this particular arrest feels so significant right now.
Right. It's about going beyond just the headlines and trying to get a sense of these, deeper political currents at play.
Okay, so let's start with the nuts and bolts of the arrest itself.
All right, let's get into it.
According to these reports, it happened on March 19th of this year, 2025.
Okay. Just a few days ago.
Yeah, very recent. And the formal charges against Imamoğlu, they're kind of twofold.
Right. There's two main tracks.
So first, you have this corruption accusation related to municipal infrastructure.
Sort of, urban development projects, things like that.
Yeah, and the sources seem to indicate that this is kind of like the standard go-to charge
It's often used.
when targeting political opponents.
Yeah, allegations of financial impropriety. It's a way to, cast doubt on their integrity.
But then there's the second charge, which is way more serious and way more politically loaded.
Right. This is where it gets really tricky.
And that's the accusation of alleged affiliations with the PKK.
The Kurdistan Workers' Party.
Which, as you know, is considered a terrorist organization by Turkey and many other nations.
Right, and that carries a lot of baggage with it.
So immediately what jumps out at me from the sources is this really strong and swift denial from Imamoğlu and his legal team.
Yeah, they're not mincing words.
They're not just saying, hey, we're innocent. They're going further.
They're claiming that the evidence is manufactured.
Yeah, they're saying this is politically motivated.
They're saying this is a setup.
And I think when you see that kind of immediate and forceful pushback,
It raises eyebrows for sure.
it suggests something else might be going on here.
Yeah, it does.
And it wasn't just the arrest itself. The whole timeline seems really compressed.
Yeah, it happened very quickly.
Almost as soon as he was taken into custody, a court-ordered pretrial detention.
That's unusual.
It really sent shockwaves through Turkey and internationally.
It felt very deliberate.
It felt like a very calculated move.
It makes you wonder what the rush was.
Yeah, exactly. So to understand why Imamoğlu is seen as such a threat, I think we need to zoom out a bit.
Right, we need some context.
We need to look at the broader arc of Erdoğan's time in power in Turkey.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
We're talking over 2 decades.
He's been a dominant force.
Yeah, he really reshaped the political landscape.
When he first came to power, he was seen as a reformer.
Yeah.
Someone who could modernize Turkey.
Right, bring it closer to the West.
But over time, and this is where the sources really paint a clear picture,
Yeah, it's been a gradual shift.
there's been a noticeable move towards a more centralized, and I think a lot of people would say, authoritarian style of governance.
So can you give us some concrete examples of that? Because I think, for folks who aren't super familiar with Turkish politics.
Sure, yeah. So if you look at the press, for example,
Yeah.
Turkey consistently ranks very poorly in terms of the number of journalists imprisoned.
That's a pretty clear indicator.
Then you have concerns about judicial independence.
Right.
The court's critics argue that the courts have become increasingly instruments of the executive branch.
So not a lot of checks and balances left.
And then, of course, you have the aftermath of the 2016 coup attempt.
That was a real turning point.
The purges that followed went far beyond those directly involved.
They targeted alleged Gulenists, Kurdish activists, really anyone seen as critical of the government.
It was a widespread crackdown.
So it seems like this long period of dominance that Erdoğan has enjoyed may be facing some challenges now.
Yeah, there are signs of erosion in his support.
And the sources point to a few key factors driving that.
Okay, what are we seeing?
Well, the economy's a big one.
Right, that's always a major factor.
We're seeing reports of really high inflation, significant youth unemployment, a weak lira.
That kind of stuff hits people where it hurts.
Yeah, it impacts daily life.
And it makes people question the leadership.
And then on top of that, you have the opposition's recent successes in local elections.
They've been gaining ground.
They've taken control of major cities like Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir.
Those are symbolic victories, but they also have real implications.
Yeah, they represent a loss of power for the AKP in key areas.
And then you add to that this growing dissatisfaction among younger voters.
Yeah, we're seeing a generational shift.
And the urban middle class, who often feel marginalized.
So all of this creates a very different kind of political landscape than maybe Erdoğan has been used to.
It's a much more challenging environment for him.
And that brings us back to Imamoğlu.
Okay, so how does he fit into this?
His popularity, especially among those younger voters.
Right, the ones who are increasingly disillusioned.
In those key urban areas,
Yeah.
it seems to directly challenge Erdoğan's grip on power.
He represents a real threat.
So the interpretation here seems to be that by sidelining Imamoğlu legally,
Whether through imprisonment or barring him from office.
the government is trying to remove a major obstacle
They're trying to avoid a direct electoral fight against him.
because they're not sure they can win.
Yeah, it's a preemptive move.
It's a very strategic calculation. So this arrest, as you can imagine, it didn't exactly go unnoticed.
Yeah, there's a reaction.
The sources describe immediate mass protests erupting across Turkey.
People took to the streets.
Yeah, with Istanbul seeming to be the epicenter.
Tens of thousands of people.
And the slogans they were chanting, I mean, that's really telling.
It gives you a sense of what's at stake.
Justice for Ekrem.
Right.
This is not a monarchy.
It's not just about Imamoğlu himself.
You know, it's about the broader direction of the country.
It's about democratic principles.
And it wasn't just Istanbul.
Right. It's spread.
We're seeing reports of solidarity protests in Ankara, Izmir, other cities.
This resonated across the country.
But the response from the authorities has also been quite strong, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing reports of a pretty heavy-handed approach.
Police using water cannons, tear gas, rubber bullets.
Numerous arrests.
And that kind of response, you know, it tends to escalate tensions.
It does.
It reinforces this perception of a government that's unwilling to tolerate dissent.
Right. It can backfire.
So these protests, they really highlight how divided Turkish society is right now.
Yeah, it's a deeply polarized moment.
You have one segment of the population that aligns with the government.
They're focused on the national security narrative.
The corruption allegations.
They see Imamoğlu as a threat.
But then you have this other significant portion of the population that sees this arrest as a power grab.
A direct attack on democracy.
And what's interesting is the criticism isn't just coming from the usual suspects.
Right. It's broader than that.
Civil society groups, bar associations, academics, artists.
Even some people who have historically been aligned with Erdoğan.
Yeah, we're seeing reports of people calling for restraint reconsideration.
It suggests a deeper unease
A wider sense of concern.
than we've seen in the past.
And the international community has also jumped in pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. This has gotten global attention.
And the response has been largely critical,
The EU condemned the arrest.
saying it's a violation of democratic norms, rule of law.
That's a big deal.
Germany's reaction has been especially strong.
Especially coming from Berlin's mayor, who has a personal relationship with Imamoğlu.
Yeah, they're close.
And we're also seeing protests in European cities with large Turkish diaspora communities.
This is resonating beyond Turkey's borders.
Absolutely.
And then you have major human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch.
They've called for Imamoğlu's release.
So the global consensus seems to be one of real worry about the state of democracy in Turkey.
Yeah, it's a major concern.
And you have to think about the broader implications for Turkey's standing in the world.
This is going to have ripple effects.
This could further isolate Turkey from the West.
Weaken ties with the EU and NATO.
And when you have political instability like this, it makes foreign investors nervous.
Right. They don't want to put their money into a risky situation.
And that could make the economic problems even worse.
It creates a vicious cycle.
So as we look ahead, what are some of the potential paths this could lead to?
Yeah, what are the possible outcomes here?
One possibility, and some of the sources really highlight this, is a further slide towards authoritarianism.
So doubling down.
Yeah. If Imamoğlu is convicted and barred from holding office,
That would be a pretty clear signal.
it would say a lot about the limits of political opposition.
And the government's willingness to use the legal system to silence critics.
Elections could become more of a formality than a genuine contest.
Right. A way to maintain the appearance of democracy without the substance.
But on the flip side, could this actually backfire on the government?
That's possible.
Could this galvanize the opposition?
It's certainly possible.
Could this become a rallying cry?
Yeah, by portraying Imamoğlu as a martyr for democracy.
It could unite the opposition in a way they haven't been before.
Right, because up until now they've been somewhat fragmented.
Yeah, it's been hard for them to present a united front.
So this could be a catalyst for that.
But there's also the risk that the government's actions could have a chilling effect.
That's the other side of the coin.
They could intimidate the opposition into silence.
Create a climate of fear
And lead to political stagnation.
where nobody wants to speak out for fear of repercussions.
And then what about the younger generation?
Right. They're a key demographic.
We hear so much about their discontent.
They've grown up with a lot of restrictions,
Censorship, limited opportunities.
and Imamoğlu seemed to connect with them.
He offered a different vision.
A more modern, inclusive Turkey.
So his arrest could fuel a youth-led movement.
They could become a powerful force for change.
And finally, we have to consider the regional implications.
Right. Turkey is a major player,
It's a key NATO member.
and they have influence in Syria, the Caucasus, the Mediterranean.
So their internal stability affects the whole region,
A more unstable Turkey could create a lot of problems.
especially for Western interests.
It could embolden Russia, for example.
So it's clear that this arrest is about much more than just one man.
It's a pivotal moment for Turkey.
It's a test of their democratic institutions.
And it really raises questions about their future direction.
The big question is, will this lead to more authoritarianism?
Or will it spark a push for democracy?
It's a story that's still unfolding.
We'll have to wait and see.
And that leaves us with a final thought for you all as you process all of this. Think about the role of international pressure.
Right. Will the EU and the US take a strong stance?
And the resilience of Turkish society itself.
Will the people demand change?
What factors, both internal and external, will be decisive in shaping Turkey's path forward?
It's a fascinating and concerning situation.
Definitely one we'll continue to follow closely.